Where does our self-talk come from?
Our self-talk is our brain's principal method of managing our life. And so it's the job, one of the jobs of the brain to store all of the messages we get, especially the messages we get that are repeated most often. So the brain would think those are the most important messages I'm getting. So I need to remember those. So the brain literally wires messages in. It stores them. And that happens from birth on. Every single message we get from the moment we're born is recorded in the brain. And then it's recorded short term. And then the messages that are repeated most often, those the brain stores. It wires them in more or less permanently. And the real problem is all of these messages we get that create our self-talk. And by the way, that self-talk is both what we say out loud and what we think silently to ourselves. The problem with most of our self-talk, or a lot of it, is that it's negative. And the brain doesn't know the difference, or the part of the brain that stores all of those messages we get. That part of the brain doesn't know the difference between something that's right or wrong, or true or false. It just remembers it, and then it acts on the programs that are the strongest. So if we're constantly telling ourselves things like, I can't do this, or I'm no good at that, or this will never work out for me, or it's just another one of those days, or I never have enough luck, or all of the kinds of things that we say that we think are harmless. Not only are they not harmless, they're very harmful, and our brain thinks they're true and does everything it can to act on them as though they're true.
Mm. You know, as I was reading your book, one of the things that really stuck out to me is that fear is also negative self-talk. And for me, I have fear of death. I have anxiety over different things that I'm more and more learning about. What advice would you give to someone who struggles with fear or anxiety on how to change some of those programmings in their mind to overcome that?
I think there are a couple of steps that I would recommend. The first is it helps to be aware that most of our fear comes from a part of the brain called the amygdala. It's a very small little section of the brain, about in the center of it. Its job is to warn us of danger. It's our alert system. And the amygdala was designed to keep us safe from anything that could possibly harm us. Most of the things that harmed people in the past, let's say thousands of years ago, we no longer have them in our lives. So we're not afraid of constant fire. We're not afraid of wild animals attacking us and so on. But the amygdala doesn't know that. So it keeps us on alert, and it's ready for any sound or anything or any piece of information we hear that could work against us. And that alerts our system to go on notice, to go on watch. And so that's our alert system. It sets us up, and we immediately think the worst first and the best last, because you can when the phone rings during the middle of the night, we don't think the best first. We think, oh no, something's wrong with somebody. They're calling me in the middle of the night. So that's the amygdala that does that. And the amygdala can get out of control. It's we can actually get into the habit of being afraid. And it's good to know that, oh, a lot of that fear I'm sensing is really coming from a part of my brain that's over alerting me. It doesn't really need to work that hard. And you can actually dampen the effect of the amygdala. So that's one thing. If you're aware of that, that can help. The other thing about fear is that anytime you think a thought that is fear-based, that could be, oh, this is going to happen, or I don't know what to expect, or I'm worried about that. It helps, even though it sounds odd when you first do it, is to turn it around and tell yourself the opposite. So when you say, I just know something's wrong, it's absolutely fine, and it's okay to say, I'm not sure if everything's right. I suspect it is, but I'm going to check on this. That is, you begin to reframe the messages that were always negative and reframe them into more of a positive light. Doesn't mean you ignore problems, that you overlook things that you need to deal with. In fact, the right kind of self-talk keeps you aware of problems, but it keeps you aware of dealing with them and puts you into action. So when you give yourself positive self-talk, it begins to alert your brain and your system to what you can do instead of what you can't do. So positive self-talk would tell you what you're capable of. And it usually goes far beyond what we even think or believe we're capable of. You and I, everyone watching or listening right now, has more quality and more capability than they will ever realize, than they'll ever put into practice in their lives. We just suspect, or we think, because we're told so often when we're growing up that we're not good enough or we'll never amount to anything. And then we start to tell that to ourselves in our own self-talk. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we end up not only believing it, but we act on it. Turning any message around that you get that tells you what won't work, what you cannot do, what you're not good at, turning those around is the first real step in changing your self-talk from negative to positive, from being afraid and being inactive to being confident and putting yourself into action.